All right, welcome to another episode of Launch School Podcast. Today we have Alex Strick van Linschoten, who is a ML engineer at ZenML and also Capstone graduate. So Alex, thanks for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm at the end of my day. You're at the beginning of yours, I guess. So we're just covering all possibilities.
Yeah, you're out in Europe, and we'll talk about that for sure. Before we get into what you're doing at work, how work is and all that, tell us a little bit about your background prior to launch school.
Prior to launch school, so I was working as a historian. I'm kind of trained, actually, I did my bachelor's degree in languages, so in Middle Eastern languages, and then spent a bunch of years writing books and doing research and eventually getting my PhD in history. And I was doing that for like 15, 20 years before I decided to kind of make a pivot towards launch school.
Yeah. So were you in academia or were you doing research?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was in academia, but like academia adjacent in the sense that like I never had a university position. I didn't do a master's. I was doing a lot of field work and I was doing like things that academics do, but I wasn't like on a fast track to tenure or anything like that.
Yeah. Gotcha. So academic background, did it for a long time. 15, 20 years is a very long time. Yeah. That's a whole career unto itself. Yeah. What prompted the change to software?
Well, in part, some like super specific stuff relating just to the nature of my work. So my speciality is in Afghanistan. And so most of my field work and research was like actually on the ground in Afghanistan. I was living there for over 15 years. And like, as you can imagine, that's like not a stress-free place to be. And yeah, at a certain point, like my body and my mind said, yeah, I could use a bit more stability in my life. So that's kind of why I found was looking for a different way. Yeah,
that's amazing. Do you still obviously you keep up with the news in Afghanistan and all that? Still, is that still part of your interest?
Sure, it's not a core part of my day. I still follow things, but not in the same way that I did in the past.
Yeah, that's incredible. 15 years in Afghanistan. That's amazing. So wanted to get into software, and you found launch school, and then just went through core, went through Capstone. Is there any interesting stories there about how you found a launch school, or why you chose launch school, or anything like that?
I mean, maybe the interesting thing is that when I found launch school, I wasn't actually too into like the web development side of things. I kind of almost found machine learning before I found launch school. And then I kind of said, oh, well, actually, if I want to do this well, I should probably get a solid foundation in like the software engineering piece. And at the time and with my research,
you didn't want to get another PhD in machine learning.
No. Although, funnily enough, I'm kind of gone back to studies and stuff now. We can get into that later, maybe. But like I realized that this was like, if I was going to go in this direction, then I wanted to like properly invest into it, and I felt like it would be like a 10 to 20 year like chunk of my life, so should put in the time. And it took me like three and a half years to go through core plus Capstone, which is on the longer side of things.
But you were very thorough in your 3 years there. So that's really interesting. That's been my experience too, in terms of when you think more long term, a lot of the short term anxieties and stress goes away. Right? There's just a lot of conflicting attributes or conflicting forces in one's life. And so, for example, a common one I hear is like, I don't have time to study. I don't have time, like 20 hours a week. I don't have that. I have to work. But this work is not satisfying, doesn't pay enough. So it's like you have to somehow break this cycle. You have to invest in time to learn so that you can get to this like more satisfying, higher paying job. But I don't have time to invest in that. I think that's where the allure of like a short burst 3-month program, gets people. It's like, great, I can hold my life at pause, hit the pause button on my life for 3 months. But when you think more long term, all of a sudden those like conflicting forces in the short term go away. right? They go away if you just think more long term.
I was so reassured by, like, I don't know if the website still has this, but it's almost like clickbait for long-term thinking. It's like, this program probably isn't for you if you want something short-term, like, just like.
That's been my experience, though, when I think about all the forces at play in education, right? If you can think more long-term, the forces actually align. If you think about things in terms of 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, you're trapped, right? You're trapped by all these conflicting forces that push you in certain directions. So you already had this mindset. You came to launchgoal.com and you're like, great, this thing totally aligns with how I think about things already. So I guess it didn't take too much convincing. Like you're not one of these people who like shopped around a lot and did a bunch of different resources and then.
No, I mean I'd done some like little courses here and there, some like basic Python or basic whatever, JavaScript or something, but never. I realized it was something that I was into, but then I thought, once I'd figured that much out, then I wanted to actually do it properly and like put in the time. So,
yeah, great. Okay, so you went through core, went through Capstone, all in a span of a 3-year period, and you're a Dutch citizen, so you're doing job hunt in Europe. What was that like? And let's put a timeline here. You started your job hunt when?
So this would be like mid 2021.
Mid 2021. Okay. Yeah. And that was a good time. Market, I think, was good at the time. I think it was 2020 was like kind of a slight dip just because everyone was confused about what was going to happen. And then 21, 22 was pretty good. 23, obviously, right now it's down a little. So 2021, good time to do a job hunt. But how was that experience in Europe? I get a lot of questions about how do I, pursue a job hunt in Europe? We give everyone the same formula in Capstone. How was that? Well, let me ask you, because I get this question a lot, and maybe we can just talk about this real quick. Is how was the Capstone in Europe? I mean, you had to stay up all night or late.
So I was actually in Karachi, in Pakistan. So I was completely opposite.
It's even worse time zone.
Yes, really the worst time zone. I spent like 2 months transitioning. My Capstone team have like very funny stories about like that they were so amazed by this. But I incrementally shifted it so that I was awake at night and asleep during the day. And I did that for the whole Capstone time. And I think there's only like 1 or 2 other people who've like done that.
In Asia, Asia is just the worst time zone. Australia too. It's a really bad time zone, and you just have to. Yeah, anybody who is gonna do Capstone from that time zone, I mean, we got to sit down and talk. Make sure you understand the sacrifices necessary. Yeah, it's there's a lot of academic studies being done by people who worked a night shift, and there's all these adverse health effects. So luckily for Capstone, we just do it for the duration of Capstone, right? And after that, you're back to normal time.
So that bit was. That bit was weird, but I mean, I was just fully transitioned over and living that weird lifestyle. And some of the job hunt was also a bit weird because I was interviewing. I wasn't actually physically in Europe, but again, there's something kind of completely unique to me. And yeah, I mean, there is a difference between the software engineering tech market in Europe versus in the US. Most obvious difference is there's a salary difference, like generally, particularly for the kind of positions that Capstone grads are going into. But also, I mean, there are other differences between the two as well. In Europe, you have universal healthcare and all sorts of other stuff as well, right? So it's not fully comparable.
The salary difference always shocks me in terms of just various people around the world. And what they can get despite their quality, right? The quality level is kind of the same, but major salary differences. Now, in Europe, I've noticed in certain countries, I won't name them, but in certain countries, there's a pretty strict adherence to like degrees. Like if you don't have a degree, they just don't know what to do with you. I think in the United States, it's more open, right? If you don't have a degree, people take a chance on you if everything else aligns really well, right? Great personal fit, cultural fit, technically competent. People are willing to take a chance on that. In certain places around the world, there's just, you don't have a degree. They won't look at you. what was your experience going through that in Europe? And also, did the fact that you had a PhD, even if it's in history, really help people or help you get through interviews?
I think I never had any explicit like confirmation of this, but my hunch was that my having a PhD accidentally got me into a bunch of doors that probably I shouldn't have got into. So I had a ton of interest and like screening interviews and so on. And then when they realized it wasn't a technical PhD, then I didn't have follow up. So I had that was kind of weird in my case.
The HR call. The HR
Sure,
call is like, oh, you're not a PhD in computer science.
Right. I guess some computer had scraped this from my CV. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, I don't think it's, I don't think it did me a disservice. And certainly the more I spend in this world, like the more I realized that being able to like communicate properly and structure your ideas and work with other people, all of these like things that launch school doesn't really necessarily get into, like all of that stuff is super valued by companies.
Absolutely. This is why we do interviews in 109, right? At the first assessment, we do interviews, and part of it is to show that you need to be able to communicate at this level. And we don't have a curriculum on communication, right? But we can at least show you where the bar is. So all that said, you still have to have technical competency, right? You have to have at least a baseline of technical competency, but it's not like you have to be at the top of the pile in technical ability to be selected for that job. That's not true, right? So you do have to be maybe above the 50 percentile at least, right, to be competitive. But then all these other factors come into play.
Sorry, the other thing there on that point is that there's I don't know what the split is within launch school of like people who are coming into launch school aged, I don't know, 18 or I don't know, you have all of these young kids now doing launch school, but like on the
most are like mid-20s, mid-30s, I think most.
But on the older side of the spectrum, like late 30s, early 40s and so on, like actually companies super value like someone who's like mature, has experience, has worked in a variety of different situations, and all of that stuff is gold.
Yeah, prior work experience actually is really important because you show that you have the ability to come in with that professionalism. You know how to handle yourself. Super important attribute in a work environment. And I've said this a lot. I always say like launch school's got you covered on the technical front, right? You can go in and feel good about your technical ability as long as if you went through core and capstone, right? But it requires more than that to land a great job. Okay. Follow-up question related to job hunt in Europe. Again, just because I get a lot of questions about this. What if someone doesn't have a degree? How do you think a job hunt in Europe will go? Or if they just have a bachelor's degree?
I don't have any indication that would be an issue at all. Like, some places will have the expectation of just a bachelor's degree as kind of a baseline. But beyond that, I didn't get any sense. Like, unless you're obviously going into some like research position or whatever, but like Capstone isn't setting you up for that necessarily anyway. So yeah, it's a hard requirement. Like in the US too, there's jobs that just require a degree, or a PhD, and you just wouldn't apply for those. Okay. Yeah, let's get into work after graduation, after the job hunt. You ended up accepting this company called ZenML. Tell us what that company's about. What does it do? And what do you do there? So ZenML is a startup based in Munich, in Germany. And we build an open source MLOps framework. So maybe a bunch of things to unpack there. So open source means that all my work and stuff is available on GitHub and whatever, like anyone can see it, and people can tinker it and adapt it and whatever themselves. So everything is, we work in the open, in public, which is common not everywhere these days, but like in the machine learning world, there's kind of a thing or a feature of the space that people distinguish themselves by being like open source. And the MLOps part is kind of emerged out of the need to bring software engineering best practices plus like DevOps, which we can talk about as well, maybe, like into the machine learning world. So machine learning is this whole thing which has its whole traditions and expertise and so on. But whenever you develop these machine learning models or things that you build with machine learning, like you also need to like make sure that they're tested properly, and you need to be able to deploy them in the right way. And it's kind of professionalizing the kind of putting machine learning in production, which is kind of a little bit of a wild west, even still now, because doing things with machine learning, whether it's on a phone or whatever, or even just on the web, like all of this stuff is complicated and hasn't been done at like global scale necessarily before, not to mention all of this new stuff like large language models and stuff, which people are busy with at the moment. Like there aren't really best practices yet. It's still being developed and still being figured out. And actually that was one of the things which attracted me to the company, that they were a small startup trying to like define and find a way within this space. So it's like
and MLOps is machine learning operations.
Yes.
And operations in software engineering lingo typically means managing and deployment and in production, right? Operations, that's just a keyword, like DevOps, right? Operations again. And just to provide an analogy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but MLOps is sort of like when we deploy our just web application into production. It's a similar analogy there. And so for the core curriculum, when you get to the point where we're deploying applications, we use what we call a platform as a service, which is a managed deployment environment, which for logical students, we use something like Heroku, or now there's some other ones like Fly.io, Render. And then in Capstone, we kind of peel back that layer and we talk about how the web applications are deployed on your own infrastructure. What would you do if you were to build Heroku, for example, or at least attempt to, right? Infrastructure pieces. And MLOps is basically taking that concept of deploying applications into production and all the things that go along with it in the ML space with large language models.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what you mean when you say professionalize. What you're saying is you're grabbing software engineering practices with regards to managing and deploying applications into production and taking those same best practices and applying it to machine learning models.
Yeah. And I think, there's a pretty strong tradition of like experimentation, and machine learning is like somehow connected to the world of science and statistics. And, there's this whole data scientist job position and so on, which is like lives in this world between software engineering and statistics and maths and stuff like that. And so when these data scientists are working and they're building things and they're figuring out how to do machine learning, which I realize we haven't necessarily got into what that is. But when they're doing this, you need to be really careful about a whole bunch of things. That the things that you're building aren't producing garbage. That it's not changing over time. That the things that people are passing in as inputs to your model aren't trying to like hack your secrets out of the model, like whatever. Like there's a whole bunch of extra things on top of like the usual software engineering operations.
Yeah. It just, I feel like it's very similar to the workflow that we have for web applications. There's like a QA workflow, right? And there's a cybersecurity discipline that is, maybe we don't call that part of like DevOps, but there's definitely a cybersecurity discipline that its goal is to work, think about the security aspect of things. QA does the basics, right? Obviously developers have to even, make sure the fundamental things are there. So that's really interesting. And I actually have attended a lot of R Studio Confs, which is R is a popular language in the data science world. RStudio is a company that backs the language and produces a really popular IDE that everybody uses. And then they put on conferences, and I've attended a bunch of these conferences. And it's always interesting to me to, whenever I attend these conferences and attend talks, it's like they introduce a new concept. They're like, this is happening in, RStudio now in the IDE. And most of the audience are like non-software engineers, but they're like academics. And they're very excited about these features. For example, one is like, we have now version control. Imagine if you make a mistake and you can now look back into history and see, go back to previous versions. And people are like, wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. And I'm just like, yeah, we've been doing that forever, in software. So, and then they have like a deployment thing, like an automated deployment thing within their IDE. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, that's Heroku. We've had Heroku for 15 years now. So it's really funny for me to see that, again, kind of like professionalize the workflow, taking things from the software engineering discipline. Can we draw a similar analogy here with regards to the machine learning world, taking things from the software engineering discipline and instituting it into machine learning world?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of like the data scientists who are producing these things and doing these experiments and so on. There's a lot of jokes, I guess is the kind way to put it, like kind of down talking of like software engineers that like these people produce bad code and then we have to like make it proper and
I did not know that. That's what machine learning people do.
But it's actually, it's like these people that they spend like years studying statistics and these complicated things, and then they have to do another thing and another thing and another thing on top of it. And you have this concept of like, just like you do in web engineering, you have like the full stack engineer. You also have the full stack ML engineer. So someone who's able to who knows all of the statistics and is really good with the math stuff, but is also able to like deploy to AWS and scale globally and whatever, and who's just as familiar with Kubernetes as they are with some kind of statistical inference or whatever. And there's actually a lot of stuff like going on. It's like the people who can do like the full spectrum are like pretty rare, I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's why you having gone through core Capstone, learning software engineering, learning programming, getting introduced into software engineering discipline, and then going to ZenML, you're able to contribute, right? Talk about that at work experience. What do you do at work? It's first of all super interesting to hear that all your work is open source and open for everyone else to judge. Kind of, I don't know if that's everyone would be enthused with that idea, but instead of having like your colleague do a code review, now everyone in the world can do a code review for you. How's that experience? What do you work on? And also I see you write a lot of blog posts, which is always amazing, and they're all very detailed. So talk about your work there.
Sure. So obviously I've been there for 2 years now. So like my work has changed over time, both as my skills have changed and as the company has changed. So early on, well, firstly, when I started, like we switched over to, we were working in Python. So there was like a little bit of a ramp up there, and I was doing kind of things which were a bit more focused on like delivering in that language. And then, as my skills and experience and so on and context with the company developed, then I took on things a bit more on the ops side. So revolved a bit more around like writing Terraform code for deployments, perhaps, working with Kubernetes. A lot of stuff in the machine learning world like happens on Kubernetes and in relation to Kubernetes. And plus like our framework like caters to all three cloud providers. So I'm on any given day, like I could well be solving a bug in AWS or GCP or Azure. So that's like super great exposure to like all of these different, to the different cloud providers and so on. And
wow,
it requires you
that's
to
tough.
be very like, to learn quickly, because certainly when you start, like for the first 6 months, I was just like drowning in all of this new stuff.
Right, of course. I mean, think about the stuff you didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't prepare you for this, right? Python, ML. You might have used AWS and Capstone, but what about Azure and GCP, right? Yeah. It's like they're not there. But I think this is where it's really interesting because there are certain disciplines that are so fast moving that everyone's doing just-in-time learning.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's important to. I feel like people who are very new to software engineering as a discipline, they can't figure out what difference between the two. Like, where are everyone's just doing just-in-time learning together versus like these are the things you really have to know, right? You got to know like basic SQL statements, right? People will side eye you if you don't know that. But if you don't know, some machine learning thing, it's like we're all doing it right now. We're all figuring it out. Like you said, even at ZenML, which is like a leader in this space, they're trying to figure out what the best practices are and all that, right? It's being formulated at this moment. 5 years from now, you'll totally get side-eyed. Yeah, if you don't know some basic thing that we're trying to figure out now, right? So the discipline keeps moving, keeps improving, keeps formalizing. And what we consider just-in-time learning changes, right? But the fundamental concepts are roughly the same. And having to go learn all these new things, wow, that's incredible. I kind of did want to ask, how did your colleagues, your manager receive that? Like, did they expect you to take this is always a tricky thing, right? When you hire somebody new and they seem really smart and good and a good person, but what if their expectations was for you to ramp up in like 1 month instead of 6, right?
So I was, I guess, lucky because I was employee number 4 when I joined. So in that sense, I had fewer colleagues, I guess. And there was it was super early in the company. So we had more time for me to flail around or figure things out than maybe we would have now. So by the time, most other people joined, it was fine. And I think I was also super lucky in that my colleagues basically gave me the gift of saying, we know you can figure this out. You've got this, which is a blessing and a curse because it means that people give you the benefit of doubt and allow you to take on things that maybe you shouldn't necessarily take on at a certain moment or whatever. But also that confidence and their I don't know, it's kind of a gift in a way that they allowed me to take on big things. And
what caught my eye was fairly short time after you accepted, you started producing articles. And I thought that was such a great tactic. Now you didn't have to produce articles publicly, but I do think that when you're tasked with something and it requires a lot of on-ramp and you're not able to show result, one of the things you can show is your research that you've done, right? At least show that you're able to consume information. You're not just sitting on, sitting on your computer and not doing anything, or just being frustrated or spinning your circles. You're able to at least produce some documentation, some clarifying documentation for others if they were to go down this road again. And those articles caught my eye, and I was like, wow, and myself not knowing too much about machine learning or machine learning ops, I was like, is Alex an expert at this now? It's only been a few months. What's going on? What was it? Just your academic background or did somebody ask you to write those articles, or what prompted them?
No, I guess it was also, firstly, I learn by writing about things. So that's just my method. And I get most of the value just by writing it. It doesn't need to be published anywhere. But, it also coincided with the fact that this is actually value that it brought to the company as well. Because I kind of restarted their blog and wrote a bunch of articles there about what we were doing and so on.
Did they ask you to do that? Did they ask you to restart their blog, or?
No, not explicitly. I think I just volunteered for it, or they
were just you write a lot, you might as well put it on our blog.
yeah, and it was kind of obvious somehow, and particularly with startups and small companies, you have a lot of leeway to take an initiative, and I also started up our company podcast and got to interview like a few dozen people, like top people in the machine learning world. So all of this stuff was like benefits me, but it also benefits the company. And so that's, early on, you're trying to show that you have value in lots of different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be like hammering out code.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. And after managing a lot of people now, I've definitely noticed that certain people, if you assign people certain tasks, they get certain type of tasks done very quickly, and other tasks are just a slog.
Mm-hmm.
And you just realize people have preferences for tasks,
Sure.
and for tasks that they enjoy super fast. Like in your case, it might be writing, right? It's just like boom, done. And when I noticed that, it's almost like that's great. I see it. But sometimes it's hard to figure that out if I don't give somebody enough tasks. I almost like need someone to tell me, right? Or prove to me, right? The tasks they like. Then it helps me understand what tasks to give them. In your case, you demonstrated that on your own, right? Instead of having like your manager trial and error what you like and what you're fast at.
But you also need to be careful at the same time not to just take on the things like I could go and write blog articles for the rest of my life, but I'm not going to get better as an engineer by doing that. So you have to balance that. But.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't mask. Ultimately, we got to bring business value and think about impact to the business.
Yeah.
And also, you probably don't want to get pigeonholed as a blog writer either, right? Even if you're good at it, it's like I don't necessarily want to grow into a technical writer.
Yeah. And engineers, as I discovered, really do not like writing documentation and this kind of thing as well. So it's like very easy to get pigeonholed into this.
Very easy to get recognized, and then also very easy to get pigeonholed. It's a catch-22. You gotta have a sense when to get recognized and then back out, make room for the next person. So that's funny because I think that's true for so many little tasks. Like I almost call them janitorial tasks, but not in a pejorative way. Like they're just things that need to be done, like CSS, for example, right? And this is one way for fairly new software engineers to get into a very, very experienced team because you're willing to do all these things. You're willing to do documentation, you're willing to do CSS, you're willing to do a little bit of system administration that nobody else really wants to spend hours doing. They can do it, but it's just like, I don't want to set up that server, right? I don't want to configure that firewall. Maybe somebody else can do it.
Even writing tests, right? Like this is something which like
writing tests.
Generally people like aren't super, but like when you're just starting out at a company, writing tests is like the best way to get to know the code base because you have to like check it and figure out how it works in order to write the good test, right? So yeah, I did a lot of that early on.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all these little tasks. And so sometimes we're like intimidated by like, well, look, all these people, they all have 10 plus years of experience. How am I supposed to go in there and contribute? Yeah, you contribute with all these quote unquote janitorial tasks. And you're able to have that breadth and positive attitude. You're not too cool for school, too cool for work, right? I'm willing to do whatever. I'm willing to contribute. And all of a sudden you're in that group and they're, mentoring you and your work grows and grows, and a couple years in, you'll be in that group, and someone else will come in and do the janitorial work. Right? That's how it goes. I think that's really good advice. Anything? I mean, how? I guess I wanted to take a step back and just ask, like, how is it going in general in this domain? We don't have a lot of. It's a fairly new domain. We don't have a lot of Capstone grads, and this is why I wanted to talk to you about it. The MLOps space. Like, how's it going for you? What are some other big pieces in this domain? If you were to just introduce, like, give a tech talk to like a core student at launch school about MLOps or ML as a discipline, how would you describe it?
I guess the easy way of describing it is to, in software engineering, right? You have a program that you write, which takes some inputs and like outputs some results or something like that. The difference with machine learning is that not only do you have the inputs which go into this thing in the middle, which we'll call a model, that produces some outputs, but you also have some things that we call weights, which are like, some kind of way for the model to know to know how to convert the inputs into the outputs. So yeah, and so machine learning is like the process by which we teach this model to better be able to convert the inputs into the kinds of outputs that we want. So in that sense, it's not so difficult in terms of a paradigm, different in terms of a paradigm from traditional software. It's just like a different way of doing it. Plus, the really big thing that's different is the fact that the way you train these models is you have a bunch of examples and data and stuff on which to train these models. And yeah, there's some like specialized hardware requirements and so on, but all of that is kind of details, I guess.
And the job here, at least relevant for, let's say, a typical launch school grad, isn't to like produce the models. There's only a small handful of like foundational models, right? These foundational models are very finite in number that a lot of people use, and they're produced by like all the big tech companies, right? And OpenAI and Facebook and all that. Now, the work is in operationalizing these models, right, for a specific use case.
Yeah. I mean, there are people who are working on like the machine learning part, but that's like a different skill set, different education, different background almost. Like that's,
yeah.
If you want to become a data scientist, like there's another set of skills and stuff that you need to learn. You need to go and study statistics and whatever.
So for us, like software engineers, we can think of a model as like the Postgres database, right? We use it, but there's somebody else that creates it.
Yeah, just some function that someone has created. But the function has its own constraints. Maybe needs to run on its own special hardware. Maybe you need to like test it in a different way. Maybe you need to make sure that it's not like, because the function doesn't stay static. Like from the moment you put it into production, it starts degrading most of the time because the data and the inputs into like the world changes. And all of that stuff, requires just a different treatment.
Applications require constant maintenance. This is true for web applications too. I mean, it requires constant maintenance. The degradation happens for web applications too. Just in the most simplistic case, it would be like logs start piling up, right? If you deployed an application onto a server, you can't just leave it alone forever. The logs will eat up hard drive, and then pretty soon it'll crash the server because you run out of hard drive space. That happened to me before, right? So you got to pay attention to it. There's always maintenance involved. And I just find a lot of similarities, and I think I'm trying to get to the point where if you learn the topics in core and Capstone, because the Capstone is where we cover a lot of software engineering disciplines, right? Core is more programming centric. Capstone is more software engineering centric, or we try to introduce you to that world. A lot of these concepts transfer over to not everything, but a lot of things do transfer over enough so that you're able to do all right.
Yeah, for sure. And like, just to give an example, like I'm the person responsible for our company I created and deployed and whatever are like company Slack bots. So we have an open source community and users come in there and they ask support questions and so on. But we have like a Slack bot, which is connected somehow to a machine learning model and so on, like trained on our documentation. So that when one of us engineers isn't necessarily around, they can just ask the bot, how do I write my code, or what's going wrong in my thing? And like this thing has been up now for 4 months or so on, and like there's like just constant little failures. It's degrading randomly. Monitoring needs to be set up in the right way. The monitoring doesn't work the way you thought it would working. There's just like 1,000 things for something even relatively simple like that. So yeah, it's hard. I know.
That's the most hilarious thing is when I get emails from prospective launch school students like, hey, will your program teach me to build, this app, right? And usually it's like some very, very exotic sounding app like Twitter plus Facebook.
Right.
And I'm like, how do you like launchschool.com? They're like, yeah, it's all right. I'm thinking about something more advanced. I'm like, yeah. Well, this little app here that you've logged into at launchschool.com took years and years to do. So it's these things require. This is why there's a lot of software engineers working on even sometimes the simplest looking apps. Right behind the scenes, there's a lot of things going on. Peeling back the layers. I feel like we can talk about machine learning as a concept, as a discipline for like another hour or two, and we might want to do that as a tech talk or another interview. But we're almost at the end of the hour here, and I just wanted to respect your time. And last couple questions here for you for this podcast. Can you give us an idea of what your day to day is? So Alex wakes up at what time, does what? Something in the morning, have some lunch, something in the afternoon. What does your day to day look like as a ML engineer?
Sure. So at work, we start at 9 a.m. We have a 15-minute stand-up where everyone talks about what they did basically yesterday and what they're planning on doing today and things which are blocking them. We're a team of 13, so we still have the whole company at the stand-up each day.
Nice. Everyone's in Europe, though?
We are from Morocco to India, but half the team are in Germany. Yeah, so we're all over
interesting.
the place.
But it's 9 a.m. local time for you.
Yes.
Okay.
And then basically, most of the time, it's you just have the day to work on whatever you're working on. Unless it's once every 2 weeks, we have a planning meeting. So I head up the open source team. So I help run that and figure out how we're going to allocate stuff for the product and the vision for the product and so on. But that doesn't happen.
So you're heading up operations here a little bit.
Well, for this little team, I help run things.
You're being modest, but it's good. It's awesome.
And yeah, what you do during the day depends a little. Obviously, there's some reviews of pull requests and code that other people have written on the team. That's a part of it. But usually, because the code base isn't so crazily huge, I'm familiar with most of the things that are going on in the code base. So the reviewing doesn't take up a crazy amount of time. And then the rest of the time you're implementing things. And that really can range from fixing bugs to debugging something that's happening on someone else's system. Or at the moment, I'm writing a lot of Terraform code. Spinning up infrastructure for other engineers to work on. Next week, I'm going to be working on basically overhauling our GitHub continuous integration system, which we kind of reached the maximum of what it can do. So we need to just overhaul that and figure out a better way to do integration testing. So it really depends. It's like a small startup. So
this is why when we're in core, we don't realize all this machinery behind the scenes that it takes to have an app in production. An app running on a laptop is just the beginning. It's just the beginning of that story, right?
Yeah.
So coding up the features is just the beginning of the story. The discipline of software engineering is about what happens when you move this application into production. And there's a million different things that can fail and requires constant, I almost call it gardening. Mm-hmm. You have to have a gardening mindset of walking around to all these systems and just checking it out and pruning the things. And even if things aren't falling apart, you still got to do things ahead of time and then set up monitoring and all that stuff afterwards, right? So it's a lifestyle. It really is. How many hours do you code in a day?
I would say most of them. I mean, 75, 80% at least. We don't really have that many meetings. I would say maybe I have 2 hours of meetings a week.
A week? Wow, that's really good.
Something like that. Yeah. We try to do a lot async. So some weeks it may be a little bit more if there's some feature we're trying to figure out. But we're also a very independent team. People are trusted to get on with things themselves, and once you know what roughly needs to be done, people let you get on with things.
But I'll give you some context here because I know that you are an extremely thorough communicator asynchronously. Because I remember in Capstone we had people write reports, and I remember always when it was your turn, I was always all right, got to get my coffee ready. Gotta,
I don't know if that's
get my shoulders.
A good report that you're giving back.
I just remember I'm like, I got to get ready for this. It's not, and the other people sometimes they don't write enough, right? I'm like, oh, that's only like 3 sentences. I need more details. For you, it's like at minimum 2-3 pages, right? I got to expect that. So I think my point is this: async communication. I think everybody thinks of this like, oh, great, 2 hours of meetings a week. Yeah, but you have to be a great asynchronous communicator. You have to be able to write a lot of words and articulate clearly, clarify without. I think sometimes this is like famous in forums, right? Like I'm on Reddit a lot. I mean, every conversation on Reddit, if you're not careful, devolves into an argument. Just because every sentence can be read in a kind of a mean-spirited way, right? And the worst is when I'm like replying on my phone. That's the worst because I'm just like fast. And then you can just tell that derailed it because people have read that short response as being condescending or something like that.
That was a super important lesson that I took away from the Capstone experience working with the team, and we all got on well, right? But we really learned that you really have to over communicate with everyone about what you're doing and why you're doing it and so on. Even when you think it's stupid, that stuff is never wasted.
Exactly. And you have to be thorough. You have to be generous, even in writing. Like in Capstone, we always say this, right? It's common for us to see. We make you write like these daily reports after you meet, right? Because we want to see them too, just to see what your team decided. Yeah. And also for yourself to have a history of your decisions and journey. And a very common phenomenon is one person will write the summary after a meeting, after that day, right? Daily summary. And then other team members will chime in and be like, hey, that's not what we decided at all. Or like that, I have a misunderstanding here. And even though it's a summary, right? And it's that day, it's not even a week later. So staying aligned is it's so hard because we all have ideas in our minds. And it's just how do we get both of our ideas across? And it's not just one way. It's not I want to get my ideas into your head. Well, I also have to receive the ideas in your head and then synchronize them or somehow, right? Synthesize them somehow. So super hard.
That's the hard,
very, very
hard work of software engineering in teams, right there, making sure everyone's on the same page and oh, you were just worried this small ticket. It's obvious to me what you were meant to do, but you did something completely different.
Exactly. And there's ways of tackling it. A lot of times it's the default is let's have Zoom meetings, right? That's the default way of tackling it. There's other ways of tackling it too, but it all requires over communication. So 2 hours of meetings a week does not mean I just talk to my colleagues twice a week. It just means that we have to be excellent at asynchronous communication, right? So, all right. Last question for you. What do you appreciate most about working in machine learning world and specifically ZenML?
So, I mean, the machine learning world, I guess one of the reasons why we're sort of having this conversation is that it's blowing up at the moment, or I mean, it has been for a while, but in a way that touches many other bits of software engineering that it hadn't before.
I think crypto grabbed a lot of attention and sucked it away a little bit, but now we're back. Yeah.
And so it's a super interesting space, right? Where a lot of things which to a greater or lesser degree will change the world around us, are being built and formulated and put into place at the moment. And so it's super interesting to be on that front seat to history in a way of technology and how technology is being implemented. That's amazing to be witness to. And ZenML as working open source in this space, and as well as a company that's trying to define a little bit how these things work and best practices and so on. You get to be part of that journey. And yeah, otherwise, I think what I was saying earlier about having a team that just trusts in you and allows you to take on big things and figure things out, and they'll be there to support you if you need. That's a super nice feeling, even though particularly at the beginning, I didn't really feel I deserved it. I was not a very good engineer back then, certainly not compared to now. So yeah, it's nice to be in an environment with colleagues who have your back and like who you get on with. So yeah.
Yeah, so important. Glad that you are there and leading the charge. And what you said about having a front seat to history, I think that's why I love software engineering as a discipline. I know the salaries are good, but I almost think salaries are good as a consequence of that. For me, it's been nonstop that, right? So I remember when I was in college, it was the first .com boom and then bubble, but it was exciting. It was exciting. Internet, applications on the internet, super, super exciting. And then software going into all enterprises, right? Enterprise software, all the businesses, you can just see banks, hospitals, government, digitizing, right? That was a huge leverage. And then startups, right? And then you say, wow, you don't have to have these like large software machinery to make a huge impact. A small group of people can make a huge impact, right? Facebook, right? Google, all these companies that just went from, very, very small number of people changed the world. And so startups was super, super motivating and inspiring for me. And Web3 crypto, really, really interesting. I have a lot of opinions about that. And I'm still very interested in it, but we'll save that for another conversation. And then obviously now like AI, ML, right? We're as software engineers, we're constantly able to have that front seat. We're constantly able to do it. And it's super exciting to be a software engineer, to be a competent software engineer, right? And to enjoy that fun, to ride in that, in the front seat of these waves. And it's exciting. It doesn't have to be always fearful. We're in a downturn right now, but there's so many exciting things happening, right? You can focus on the fear or focus on the exciting. I mean,
sometimes it's a bit terrifying to see like how these things actually get made, like on the other side of the screen. But yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is terrifying. I remember when I first deployed I had a startup way back in the day, and I deployed a startup. We have real users, and I just realized I can see the entire database. I can see everything. Is that good or bad? And it made me think twice about like submitting information to websites. There's like some developer out there, some system administrator can access the database. So your Snapchat or whatever is not as secure as you think.
Yeah, but even beyond that, like I think it's like a lot of this stuff is way more brittle and like whatever, just like you miss one comma and like everything falls apart. Like you hear about all of these like things sites that go down or whatever. It's like it's often something really, really tiny. And it just shows like how far we have as well, like still to go as like a discipline, as an industry. Like obviously absolutely things are better than they were 20 years ago. But yeah.
This is why I'm fanatical about quality, about like insisting on producing people who I would call colleagues. Right. And what by that I just mean I will give you the launchschool.com code base, right? And have you deploy it and work on it. You got to know what you're doing because you could bring the site down, right? And that will negatively impact a lot of people. So I just want some minimum baseline level of competency, right? And if again you want to work remote, you don't want to have a lot of meetings, and you got to be a good writer and you got to be a great communicator, and you got to be clear and precise. This is all the things we emphasize on assessments, right? And try to let people know that's how you get to like this level, and it's not impossible. You can do it, right? So any last words of advice or wisdom for people, let's say in a core curriculum, who have an interest in this domain, this space? How can like besides like focus, like go through launch school, let's say, right? But besides that, after that, I think a lot of people just want to hear like, how can they contribute given their skill set? Can they contribute given their skill set? And yeah, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I say like the fundamentals really do count. Like it's not just something that is up there on the launch school website or whatever. Like this stuff actually does matter and will take you far and is actually like needed. Like the data science part of machine learning that we were talking about, like that's maybe a separate thing. But like as every company tries to get a little piece of like large language models and like bring it in, or like have their own chatbot or whatever, like there's all sorts of ways to be involved in machine learning without necessarily needing to do a course in statistics, and like particularly at the moment, I would say
a lot of low hanging fruit, right? Just to make sure the models don't fall apart, make sure the Slack bot doesn't fall apart. So many areas. Yeah, that's why I'm not afraid for our discipline in terms of jobs. There's just like way too many things to work on. So yeah, thanks for stopping by the podcast, Alex. I think you're doing great. Obviously, I look forward to just continuing to see you do well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.